All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at this quiz review for solving quadratic equations by factoring. I'm going to work these out in case you had trouble with any of these. You can see how to get the correct answer. So first one, number one, we have r squared minus r minus 12 equals 0. So when I go to factor this, I notice that my third term is negative. That tells me that this is a plus minus. So I know I'm going to have r plus something times r minus something equals 0. And then I need to think, okay, so what are two numbers that multiply together to make negative 12? And the difference is going to be negative 1, right? Because there's the invisible 1 here in front of this r. So if I think about 3 times 4, that's 12. And 4 minus 3 is 1. And since my middle term is negative, that tells me that my bigger number needs to go next to the minus sign. So the 4 is going to go here. And the 3 is going to go here, because 3 times negative 4 is negative 12, and 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1. Next step, we're going to take each binomial and set each one equal to 0. So we have r plus 3 equals 0, and r minus 4 equals 0. Then we're going to solve. So I'm going to here subtract 3 from both sides, and I get r equals negative 3. And over here, on this equation, I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I get r equals positive 4. All right, next example. We have here x squared plus 7x plus 12. And I notice that all three terms are positive. That means this is a plus plus, right? So I have here x plus something times x plus something else, and that's going to equal 0. And again, I'm thinking of two numbers that multiply together to make 12 and add together to make 7. And again, that's going to be 3 and 4, because 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 plus 4 is 7. So now I set each of these binomials equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. And then solve these. So subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 3. And over here, I subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 4. All right, moving on. K squared plus 6k plus 5 equals 0. Again, they're all positive. So this is going to be k plus something times k plus something equals 0. So two numbers that multiply together to make 5 and add together to make 6. So that's going to be 1 and 5. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 plus 5 is 6. Then we set each one of these binomials equal to 0. And we solve. So here, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. I get k equals negative 1. And over here, subtract 5 from both sides. And I get k equals negative 5. All right. This next example over here, number 3. Now this one is a little bit different because look at our a value. Our a value is not 1. So we're going to go ahead and use the concept of the diamond method. Okay? So I'm going to put my x over here. Remember that in the top section, I'm going to do my a value times my c value. So AC, so 3 times 2, that's 6. And in the bottom, I'm going to put my b value, that's 7. And then on the left and the right, I'm going to take my first term without the square, and that's going to become the numerator of my fraction. So I have here 3b over something and 3b over something. Okay? So then what I need to do here is I need to find two numbers that multiply together to make 6 and add together to make 7. And that would be 6 times 1. So let's put the 1 over here, and let's put the 6 over here. 3b over 1, this is already in simplest form. Let me do this. And 3b over 6, I can divide both of these by 3, and this gives me b over 2. Okay, so these are my two binomials. So now I have here 3b plus 1 times b plus 2. That equals 0. I'm going to go ahead and set each of these equal to 0. So 3b plus 1 equals 0. And over here, b plus 2 equals 0. So over here, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides. And I get 3b equals negative 1. And then I'm going to divide by 3, and I get b equals negative 1/3. And over here, I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get b equals negative 2. Okay, number 5. We have here 15a squared minus 17a plus 4 equals 0. Again, we need to use our diamond method. So let me draw my x here. This top space, a times c, so 15 times 4 is 60. This bottom space, b, which is negative 17. And on the left and on the right, we have our 15a as our numerator. Okay, so two numbers that multiply together to make positive 60 and add together to make negative 17. And that's going to be negative 12 times negative 5. Okay, so we have here, let's put here negative 5 over here and negative 12 over here. We simplify. 15a and 5 can be divided by 5, so this gives me 3a over negative 1. And over here, 15a and negative 12 can be divided by 3, so this gives me 5a over negative 4. And these are my two binomials. So I have here 3a minus 1 times 5a minus 4 equals 0. Then we set each of these as their own equations equal to 0. So 3a minus 1 equals 0, and 5a minus 4 equals 0, and then we solve. We add 1 to both sides here, and I get 3a equals 1. And then when I divide by 3, I get a equals 1/3. Second equation, I'm going to add 4 to both sides here. And I get 5a equals 4. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 5. And I get a equals 4/5. All right, number 6. Okay. Number 6, on this one, notice that the equation is not set equal to 0. So the first thing we need to do here is set it equal to 0. So I need to get rid of that negative 4 by adding 4 to both sides. Okay, so I have here n squared plus 4n, and negative 1 plus 4 is positive 3, and now that equals 0. Okay, so now let's factor. I see that all three of my terms are positive, so this is going to be n plus something times n plus something equals 0. And I need to think what are two numbers that multiply together to make 3 and add together to make 4. And that's going to be 3 and 1. So I have here n plus 3 times n plus 1 equals 0. I set each one of these separately equal to 0. Then I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and I get n equals negative 3. Over here, I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides, and I get n equals negative 1. All right. Number 7, x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals negative 3. Again, I don't want I need this to be equal to 0, right? So I need to get rid of this negative 3, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides. And this gives me x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. And now I can factor. It's all positive, so it's going to be x plus some number times x plus some number equals 0. Two numbers that multiply together to make 8 and add together to make 6, that would be 2 and 4. And then we set our equation. So x plus 2 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. So then subtract 2 from both sides here, and I get x equals negative 2, and subtract 4 from both sides here, and I get x equals negative 4. Number 8, n squared minus 2n minus 1 equals 2. I need to set this equal to 0, so I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides, and I get n squared minus 2n minus 3 equals 0. I look here and I see that my c value, my third term, is negative. This means that this is going to be n plus something times n minus something equals 0. So now two numbers that multiply together to make negative 3, and when I combine them, I get negative 2. So 3 times 1 is 3, and 3 minus 1 is 2. And since my middle term is negative, that means my bigger number needs to go next to the negative sign. So it's going to be a negative 3 and a positive 1. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. And then I'm going to set these equations equal to 0. N plus 1 equals 0. And n minus 3 equals 0. And then when I solve these one-step equations, I get my answers. So n equals negative 1 and n equals positive 3. All right, last two questions. Okay, so 3x squared plus 8x equals 3. Again, I need to set this equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides. And I get 3x squared plus 8x minus 3 equals 0. Now I notice that my a value is not 1, so I need to use my diamond method. And I'm going to put up here a times c, so 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Down here I'm going to put my b value, which is 8. And then over here I'm going to put 3x and 3x as the numerators of my fractions. So what are two numbers that multiply together to make negative 9, and when you add them you get positive 8? So that would be 9 times 1 is 9, and 9 minus 1 is 8. And since my b value is positive, that means my bigger number is going to be positive. So there's going to be a negative 1 here and a positive 9 here. Because negative 1 times 9 is negative 9, and negative 1 plus 9 is 8. This fraction is already in simplest form. And over here, 3x over 9, I could divide by 3, and I get x over 3. So these are my two binomials. So I have here 3x minus 1 times x plus 3 equals 0. I set each of these separately equal to 0. 3x minus 1 equals 0, and x plus 3 equals 0. And then we solve. So add 1 on both sides here, and I get 3x equals 1. And then when I divide by 3, I get x equals 1/3. Over here, when I subtract 3 from both sides, I get x equals negative 3. All right, last example. We got 2n squared plus 13n plus 18 equals negative 2. I need to set this equal to 0, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And this gives me 2n squared plus 13n plus 20 equals 0. Next, I need to set up my diamond method because my a value is, let me do it here, because my a value is not 1. So up here, I'm going to do a times c. 2 times 20 is 40. Down here, I'm going to do my b value, which is 13. And then over here, 2n squared. Over here, I'm going to put 2n as my numerators for my fractions. All right. So now I have to think of two numbers that multiply together to make positive 40 and add together to make 13, and that would be 5 times 8. 5 times 8 is 40, and 5 plus 8 is 13. So put a 5 here and an 8 here. Over here, 2n over 5, that's already in simplest form. And here, 2n over 8, I could divide it by 2, and this gives me n over 4. So those are my two binomials. So I have here 2n plus 5 times n plus 4 equals 0. Then I set my equations. So I have here 2n plus 5 equals 0 and n plus 4 equals 0. Work these out. Subtract 5 from both sides. And I get 2n equals negative 5. Then I divide by 2. And I get n equals negative 5 over 2, or negative 2.5. And then up here, n plus 4 equals 0. This is a one step. So subtract 4 from both sides. And I get n equals negative 4. All right, I hope that this review has helped you to get ready for the quiz.